In an age dominated by advanced diagnostics and life-saving surgeries, it's easy to forget the dark, often gruesome, path medicine once had to carve for itself. Imagine a world where the very blueprint of human life, our anatomy, was a forbidden book sealed by ancient taboos and the visceral fear of the dead. For centuries, physicians and surgeons struggled in a fog of ignorance, their understanding of the human body limited to what text described, or what could be gleaned from accidental injury or execution. This profound lack of practical knowledge was a deadly obstacle, claiming countless lives, hindering any true advancement in healing. But as the dawn of scientific inquiry broke, an insatiable hunger for anatomical truth emerged. To truly heal, one first had to understand the intricate mechanics within. The problem? Legitimate, systematic access to human cadavers was virtually non-existent, guarded fiercely by societal and religious decree. This desperate need for knowledge, met with staunch resistance, created a macabre market, a clandestine industry born from the shadows, body snatching. From the moonlit churchyards of Europe to the bustling metropolises of America, resurrectionists or sacking UPS plied their grim trade, exhuming the recently buried to fuel the scalpel-wielding anatomists. Their illicit enterprise, though ethically abhorrent, became the unwitting crucible in which modern medicine was forged. This documentary, Grave Robbers and Scalpels, will embark on a journey through 35 gripping sections, peeling back the layers of this grim, yet pivotal chapter. We will explore the desperate anatomists, the audacious body snatchers, the public outrage, and the seismic shifts in law and ethics that ultimately transformed grave robbing into the structured, ethical cadaver donation systems we rely on today. Prepare to discover the unsettling truth of how the darkest of deeds illuminated the path to modern medical marvels. For millennia, the human body, after death, remained a sacred, inviolable vessel. Across ancient civilizations, deeply ingrained religious beliefs and societal customs erected formidable barriers against its defilement. To cut into the deceased was not merely an act of disrespect, but often a sacrilege, believed to condemn the soul or disrupt its journey to the afterlife. This profound taboo, from ancient Egypt's meticulous preservation to Roman reverence for the dead, effectively stifled any systematic study of human anatomy. For centuries, physicians and scholars were denied the most fundamental tool for understanding life: direct observation of the body itself. This meant that medical knowledge was largely theoretical, based on flawed assumptions and conjecture, profoundly limiting any true advancement in healing or surgical practice. In the vacuum created by these ancient prohibitions, a single figure emerged to dominate Western medicine for over 1,300 years: Galen of Pergamon. A brilliant Roman physician of the 2nd century A.D., Galen wrote profusely, synthesizing much of the medical knowledge of his era. Yet, his understanding of human anatomy was critically flawed. Forbidden from dissecting human cadavers, Galen based his elaborate theories almost entirely on the dissection of animals: pigs, monkeys, and goats. His meticulously detailed descriptions, though groundbreaking for their time, contained fundamental errors, mistakenly attributing animal structures and functions to humans. These inaccuracies, enshrined in countless texts, became dogma, preventing empirical challenges and tragically hindering any genuine understanding of human physiology until a radical shift finally began to take hold. The 16th century Renaissance, a period bursting with intellectual curiosity and a fervent desire to rediscover the world through direct observation, provided the fertile ground for medicine's greatest upheaval. Andreas Vesalius, a Belgian anatomist, dared to challenge Galen's supremacy. Appointed professor at the University of Padua, Vesalius rejected rote memorization and embraced the scalpel. His monumental 1543 work, De Humani Corporis Fabrica, on the fabric of the human body, was more than just a book. It was a revolution. Featuring breathtakingly accurate illustrations, It meticulously documented human anatomy based on actual human dissection. Vesalius's courageous work systematically exposed Galen's errors, ushering in an unprecedented era where understanding the human body required direct, empirical engagement, creating an urgent, undeniable need for cadavers. As Vesalius's revelations spread, the demand for practical, hands-on anatomical instruction exploded. The old system, based on lectures and animal dissections, was now woefully inadequate. Thus began the slow, arduous birth of what would become the modern medical school. Universities across Europe established dedicated anatomy theaters, transforming medical education from theoretical philosophy into a rigorous, empirical science. Students, now expecting to witness and participate in dissections, flocked to institutions like Padua, Leiden, and later, the burgeoning schools of London and Edinburgh. The era of observation and experimentation had arrived, but with it came a monumental challenge: how to supply the hundreds, soon thousands, of human bodies needed to train this new generation of physicians and surgeons, when the legal channels remained ancient and restrictive. The rapid expansion of medical knowledge and the establishment of dedicated anatomy schools created an unprecedented, unquenchable thirst for human cadavers. A single medical school might require dozens, even hundreds, of bodies annually for dissection, yet the legal supply was a mere trickle. Across Britain and continental Europe, laws were archaic, primarily reserving bodies for dissection to a select few, executed criminals. With the burgeoning number of students and the growing complexity of anatomical studies, this limited legal pool was woefully, catastrophically insufficient. Professors grew desperate, students frustrated. The gap between educational need and legal availability widened into a chasm, forcing medical institutions and ambitious anatomists to contemplate ethically murky, often illegal, solutions to procure the bodies so vital for their work. For centuries, the bodies of executed criminals served as the primary, and often only, legal source for anatomical dissection. In Britain, the 1752 Murder Act explicitly allowed judges to sentence murderers to post-mortem dissection, a fate often considered a greater terror than death itself, as it denied a Christian burial and the hope of resurrection. These public dissections, often performed in a dissection theater before a paying audience, served as both scientific instruction and a grim deterrent. Yet, even with this draconian measure, the number of executed individuals was never enough to satisfy the ever-growing needs of medical science. A handful of bodies a year could not possibly sustain an entire profession. This brutal, insufficient system left a gaping void, one that darker forces would soon be eager to fill. As the demand for cadavers soared and the legal supply dwindled to a negligible trickle, a sinister new profession emerged from the shadows: the resurrectionists, more chillingly known as body snatchers. These weren't opportunistic vandals. They were skilled, organized criminals operating within a macabre supply chain. Driven by dire poverty and the lucrative payments offered by desperate anatomists, these individuals would undertake the ultimate taboo: disturbing the dead. They knew precisely when and where to find their grim merchandise, often targeting fresh graves, particularly those of the recently deceased poor. This clandestine industry flourished in the 18th and 19th centuries, especially in bustling medical centers like London and Edinburgh, where the price of a fresh cadaver could easily outstrip a laborer's annual wage, making grave robbery a shockingly profitable enterprise. The resurrectionists were far from crude, grave desecrators. They were professionals employing specific, efficient techniques honed by grim experience. To avoid detection, they rarely disturbed the entire grave. Instead, they would often dig a narrow shaft at the head of the coffin, then use specialized tools, a long iron hook or a grappling iron, to snag the body. By applying leverage, they could break the coffin lid at one end and pull the corpse out with minimal soil disturbance, often leaving the grave looking almost untouched. Working under the cloak of night, usually just hours after burial, their operations were swift, silent, and chillingly effective. Their grim inventory, shovels, levers, and large sackcloths were the implements that pried open the earth, revealing the dark underbelly of medicine's relentless quest for knowledge. As twilight bled into the deepest hours, a sinister ritual unfolded across the British Isles. The operations of body snatchers, or resurrectionists as they chillingly preferred, were inherently nocturnal, shrouded in a silence broken only by the whispers of the wind and the rasp of steel on earth. Under the cloak of a moonless sky, or perhaps one barely illuminating the fog, they moved with a macabre precision. Freshly dug graves were their targets, identified by the telltale mound of loose soil. A team of 2 or 3 would work quickly, silently, one to keep watch, the others to exhume. Spades, crowbars, and a canvas sack were their tools, stealth and speed their only allies. The dread was palpable, not just for the victims, but for the perpetrators, knowing discovery meant a brutal end or a long stretch in prison. It was a dance with death, performed in the hallowed grounds of the departed. Once the earth surrendered its recent occupant, the clock began to tick. The cadaver, often stripped of its burial shroud to avoid suspicion and reduce bulk, was swiftly wrapped in canvas or sacking. The journey from grave to anatomy theater was a perilous one, a clandestine relay through the arteries of the urban night. Hidden horse-drawn carts, their wheels muffled with straw, navigated twisting alleyways, avoiding patrolling constables. Secret signals, whispered passwords, and prearranged rendezvous points dotted this macabre network. From London's grimy backstreets to Edinburgh's cobbled closes, the snatch cargo would travel, its final destination almost always a medical school or a private anatomical lecture hall, where professors waited, eager for their illicit delivery. This was the dark supply chain, fueling the dawn of modern medical education. This grisly trade, while fraught with danger, was undeniably lucrative. A fresh corpse could fetch anywhere from 5 to 10 guineas in the early 19th century, a sum equivalent to several months' wages for a common laborer. For men mired in poverty, with few prospects, body snatching offered a desperate, if morally reprehensible, path to survival. The resurrectionists were not always hardened criminals. Many were driven by dire necessity, the gnawing hunger that makes men brave the gallows. They understood the macabre economics. The greater the demand from the burgeoning medical schools, the higher the price. They were the grimy, indispensable cogs in a system that relied on their illicit harvests, providing a commodity few others dared to touch, yet one that medical advancement desperately required. The hands that offered those guineas were often those of respected medical professors, eminent surgeons, and the administrators of the very institutions meant to safeguard public health. This was the moral compromise at the heart of the body snatching epidemic. Medical schools, particularly in anatomical powerhouses like Edinburgh and London, found themselves in an impossible position. Legally, the supply of cadavers was woefully inadequate, limited almost exclusively to executed criminals. Yet, the thirst for practical anatomical knowledge was insatiable. How could future doctors learn the intricate workings of a human body without dissecting it? The justification was clear, if ethically murky. The advancement of science, the saving of countless lives, necessitated the desecration of a few. They were complicit, not out of malice, but out of an unyielding commitment to progress and a desperate need for fresh material. Within the hallowed, yet often malodorous, halls of these anatomy schools, hundreds of eager young men, future surgeons and physicians, honed their skills. They were acutely aware of the illicit origins of the cadavers before them. A fresh cadaver, arriving unannounced and often late at night, was a clear signal. The air in the dissecting rooms was thick with the scent of preservatives and death, but also with an almost tangible sense of shared secret and desperate ambition. For these students, the ethical dilemma was often overshadowed by the profound opportunity to learn. This was invaluable, hands-on experience, the only true way to master the complexities of human anatomy. Their silence, their quiet acceptance, was a testament to their burning desire for knowledge, a desire that ultimately benefited generations to come, built upon the foundation of stolen flesh. While medical professionals justified their methods, the public lived in a state of growing terror. News of grave desecration spread like wildfire through towns and villages, fueled by gossip and sensationalized broadsides. The fear was profound twofold: the horror of a loved one's final resting place being violated, and the chilling thought that one's own body might meet the same fate. For a society deeply rooted in spiritual beliefs about the sanctity of the body and the soul's peaceful journey, body snatching was an unimaginable sacrilege. This wasn't merely theft. It was a profound violation of dignity, faith, and the very fabric of communal trust. Graves became sites of anxiety, not solace, and outrage simmered, threatening to boil over into mob rule. In response to this epidemic of desecration, communities throughout Britain devised ingenious, and often desperate, measures to protect their dead. Mort safes, heavy iron cages placed over freshly dug graves, sometimes weighing over a ton, became common sights. Other defenses included massive stone slabs, spring-loaded guns concealed within graves, and even sturdy watchtowers erected in cemeteries, manned by armed guards. These grave watchers were often volunteers, patrolling through the night, muskets at the ready. Such elaborate precautions highlight the sheer scale of the body snatching problem and the intense fear it generated. Protecting a loved one's eternal rest became an expensive, sometimes violent, endeavor, turning peaceful graveyards into fortresses against the ghoulish trade. When official justice felt inadequate, and the law seemed powerless to halt the ghoulish trade, communities sometimes resorted to taking matters into their own hands. Suspected body snatchers, if caught, faced the immediate and brutal wrath of an enraged mob. Tales of resurrectionists being tarred and feathered, severely beaten, or even lynched spread quickly, serving as grim warnings. The intensity of public anger was terrifying. It was the fury of a betrayed community, seeing its most sacred traditions violated. The fear of being buried only to be dug up and sold was so profound that it shattered the thin veneer of civility, revealing a primal need for retribution. This vigilante justice, though horrifying, underscored the depth of public despair and the desperate measures taken to protect the final peace of their departed. In the intellectual heart of 18th and 19th century Britain, Edinburgh reigned supreme as a beacon of medical enlightenment. Its university boasted a world-class anatomy department, attracting aspiring surgeons from across the globe. Yet, this very pursuit of knowledge cast a long, grim shadow over the city's ancient kirkyards. The insatiable demand for fresh cadavers far outstripped the meager legal supply, typically only the bodies of executed criminals. This desperate shortage created a lucrative, clandestine market. Under the cover of Scottish mist and moonless nights, the city's graveyards became hunting grounds for specialized ghouls, transforming Edinburgh into the notorious epicenter of Britain's body-snatching trade. For those eager to master the human form, the path to understanding often began with an illicit journey through the city's darkest secrets. The burgeoning trade in stolen cadavers reached its most horrific apex not in the dead of night, but in the grim, unassuming lodging houses of Edinburgh's Westport. Here, two Irish immigrants, William Burke and William Hare, etched their names in a history with deeds so foul they would forever redefine the term body snatching. Their enterprise began conventionally enough, selling the body of a lodger who died naturally. But the ease of profit, coupled with Dr. Robert Knox's unwavering demand, soon corrupted them. Burke and Hare transcended grave robbing. They became murderers for anatomy. Their victims were not sourced from graves, but lured into a web of false friendship, alcohol, and brutal suffocation, their lives extinguished solely to satisfy the relentless hunger of the anatomist's scalpel. Between 1827 and 1828, Burke and Hare embarked on a chilling spree, claiming the lives of at least 16 innocent individuals. Their modus operandi was horrifyingly simple: identify vulnerable outcasts, paupers, prostitutes, travelers, offer them drink, and then burk them, a term that became synonymous with their unique method of smothering without leaving obvious marks of violence. The bodies, delivered fresh and unmarked, fetched between 8 and 10 pounds each from Dr. Robert Knox's anatomy school, a sum that dwarfed a laborer's annual wage. As victim after victim vanished, suspicion grew among the residents of Westport. The frequency of sudden deaths in the lodgings, coupled with the unusual silence of the departed's belongings, began to unravel the gruesome truth, drawing the net ever tighter around the murderous duo. At the heart of this macabre enterprise stood Dr. Robert Knox, Edinburgh's most celebrated and charismatic anatomist. His lectures were legendary, his dissections meticulous, and his ambition insatiable. Knox's reputation demanded a constant supply of fresh specimens, and he famously adopted a no-questions-asked policy when purchasing cadavers. His singular focus on scientific advancement blinded him to the ethical abyss he was skirting or perhaps even actively enabling. While there was no direct evidence he knew of the murders, his eager acquisition of suspiciously fresh bodies from Burke and Hare and his willingness to pay premium prices undeniably fueled their deadly trade. Public outrage, when the truth emerged, was fiercely directed at Knox, painting him as a callous accomplice who valued scientific progress over human life. The dramatic discovery of their final victim, Mary Docherty, led to the swift arrest of Burke and Hare in November 1828. What followed was a sensational trial that gripped the nation. In a controversial move, Hare turned King's evidence, testifying against Burke in exchange for immunity. William Burke was found guilty and, on January 28, 1829, was publicly executed before a crowd of thousands in Edinburgh, his body later dissected for anatomical study. A chillingly ironic fate. Hare, despite his admitted complicity in the murders, walked free, vanishing into obscurity, a source of enduring public resentment. The Burke and Hare murders sent shockwaves through society, exposing the dark underbelly of medical progress and directly influencing the passage of the 1832 Anatomy Act, which finally provided a legal framework for cadaver supply, forever changing medical education. While Burke and Hare's atrocities cemented their place in infamy, Edinburgh was far from unique. Across the border, in the sprawling, grimy metropolis of London, an equally robust and ruthless trade in cadavers flourished. With its numerous medical schools and a vast, anonymous population, the capital became fertile ground for organized gangs of resurrectionists. These professional body snatchers operated with sophisticated networks, often bribing sextons and cemetery guards, or employing elaborate techniques to avoid detection. They meticulously mapped graveyards, sometimes staking out funerals to predict their next target. Names like the London Burkers, though less individually notorious than their Edinburgh counterparts, struck terror into the hearts of families across the city, whose only desire was for their loved ones to rest undisturbed. The demand for bodies in London was so relentless, it fueled a truly industrial-scale illicit enterprise. The urgent need for anatomical specimens was not confined to the British Isles. As nascent medical schools emerged across the Atlantic in the fledgling United States, they too faced the crippling shortage of cadavers. Without a legal framework for donation or unclaimed bodies, American professors and students resorted to the same morally ambiguous solutions. From New York to Philadelphia, Boston to Baltimore, the quiet sanctity of graveyards was routinely violated. Medical students, often dubbed resurrectionists themselves, would clandestinely visit cemeteries, sometimes even their own towns, to exhume the recently buried. The practice fueled public outrage and distrust, particularly as the bodies of the poor and marginalized were disproportionately targeted, mirroring the ethical dilemmas faced by their European counterparts and setting the stage for future clashes. The simmering public anger against grave robbing erupted violently in New York City in 1788, in what became known as the Doctors' Riot. The spark was ignited when a group of boys playing near New York Hospital peered into a window and saw a doctor dissecting a cadaver, reportedly waving a dismembered arm at them. The arm was recognized as belonging to the mother of one of the boys. Word quickly spread, igniting a furious mob that stormed the hospital and ransacked anatomy labs, discovering numerous desecrated bodies. The riot escalated over several days, forcing doctors into hiding and requiring the militia, including Governor George Clinton, to intervene. Casualties mounted, with several rioters killed and injured. This bloody confrontation underscored the profound societal tension between the desperate need for anatomical knowledge and the sacred right of the dead to rest in peace. Our journey through the shadow lands of medicine forces a somber pause. The advancements we now take for granted, the intricate understanding of human anatomy that underpins every surgical triumph, every diagnostic breakthrough, they carry a profound, often forgotten cost. In the 18th and 19th centuries, the scalpel's edge was sharpened not just by curiosity, but by a desperate scramble for knowledge, fueled by graves plundered under moonless skies. Each stolen body, each desecrated resting place, represents a sacrifice, not of a willing donor, but of an unsuspecting soul whose final peace was violently disturbed for the sake of science. This brutal reality, though abhorrent, formed the bedrock upon which modern medical understanding was painstakingly built. It's a chilling reminder that progress, especially in its infancy, can be forged in the darkest of ethical compromises, demanding we acknowledge the human price of enlightenment. Yet, from this dark genesis, an unexpected dawn emerged. The very act of body snatching, born of necessity and ethical vacuum, inadvertently forced a critical reevaluation of how medical knowledge should be acquired. Public outrage, coupled with the insatiable demand for cadavers, eventually spurred legislative change and the establishment of anatomical acts, most notably Britain's Anatomy Act of 1832. These pivotal reforms began to transform a clandestine criminal trade into a structured, albeit still imperfect, legal system for cadaver supply. This paradigm shift, spurred by the gruesome realities of the grave robbers' era, slowly but surely laid the essential foundation for the ethical, regulated medical education systems we recognize today, where anatomical dissection transitioned from an illicit pursuit to a cornerstone of legitimate scientific training. Today, in the pristine, brightly lit anatomy laboratories of universities worldwide, the echoes of those grim days have been replaced by profound respect. Cadavers, now ethically sourced through voluntary donation programs, are no longer objects of illicit trade, but revered first patients and silent teachers. Students, poised at the threshold of their medical careers, approach each dissection with a solemn gratitude, understanding that every lesson learned, every nerve traced, every muscle identified, is a gift from an individual who, in their final act, chose to contribute to the greater good of humanity. This sacred trust underscores the immense honor bestowed upon these silent benefactors, whose ultimate selfless act continues to illuminate the path for generations of physicians, ensuring that the knowledge once stolen from the grave is now freely and respectfully given, forging a future of healing. We have journeyed through a history shrouded in darkness, from the ancient, visceral fear of the desecrated dead to the precise, life-saving interventions of modern operating rooms. The path from ignorance to insight was not a clean one. It was paved with the illicit acts of body snatchers, whose macabre trade, though morally indefensible, undeniably propelled medical science forward at a critical juncture. The insatiable demand for anatomical knowledge, met initially by the shadows of the graveyard, eventually forced society to confront its taboos. The cries of outrage, the legal battles, and the profound ethical dilemmas stirred by the resurrectionists ultimately catalyzed the creation of systematic, legal, and respectful cadaver donation programs. These dark origins served as a crucible, forging the ethical and scientific frameworks that underpin every contemporary medical school. Today, every diagnostic breakthrough, every surgical triumph, every nuanced understanding of the human body owes a profound, complex debt to this grim legacy. The nameless individuals exhumed from their resting places, whether by force or later by voluntary donation, were, in a very real sense, the first teachers of modern medicine. Their silent lessons, born from the depths of desperation and darkness, continue to resonate, illuminating the path for healers across generations, reminding us that even from the most ethically fraught beginnings, profound progress can emerge.